I'm Nova.
I'm Alloy, and this is AgentStack Daily.
The terminal-based coding agent OpenAI Codex .142.4 shipped as a chores-only maintenance release, including Bedrock catalog work and 2 internal Codex changes without adding user-facing behavior. HP also scaled its OpenAI Frontier partnership, adding a governance and context layer across ChatGPT, Codex, WXP device operations, and the HP Partner Portal.
Those are concrete builder surfaces: provider routing in Codex, code modernization through Codex, security remediation through OpenAI models, partner workflows inside a portal that serves more than 100,000 partners, and device fleet operations tied into HP's WXP platform. The release set is not flashy, but the enterprise wiring is real.
Today, Codex maintenance leads, HP wires OpenAI Frontier into a global enterprise stack, Broadcom joins OpenAI's inference silicon roadmap, Claude becomes a personal health research coordinator, and Micron's HBM supply turns into an AI infrastructure constraint.
Also ahead, OpenAI maps EU workforce exposure with a taxonomy overlay, Ford rehires senior engineers after an AI quality push stumbles, SoftBank and Sam Altman question orbital data center economics, Apple hardware talent flows toward OpenAI, and Asian model providers push into Anthropic comparable territory.
Plus this cycle, OpenAI narrows the GPT 5.6 rollout after a government access request, and OpenAI poaches Uber India's chief to run its biggest non-US market.
12 distinct stories today, with the model discovery lane reporting no new entries worth surfacing and a 3-repo MCP radar queued at the back. Let's run them. OpenAI shipped Codex .142.4 on June 29, and both the release page and the project comparison label it chores only. The diff against .142.3 contains 3 commits, 1 Bedrock catalog feature PR brought into the line, plus 2 Codex maintenance changes. .142.3 was also chores only, so across the last 2 Codex Rust releases, builders do not get a new command, a new prompt mode, or a new visible agent behavior.
The useful signal comes from where the work landed. Bedrock catalog work entering through a maintenance lane suggests OpenAI is still shaping the catalog and routing surface while keeping the terminal-based agent stable for day-to-day use. For teams that call Bedrock directly instead of routing everything through the OpenAI SDK, catalog resolution is the surface to understand, because a quiet release can still reveal where provider path work is happening.
Most builders can read .142.4 as a low-drama maintenance tag rather than a migration event. The important detail is that Codex's public surface stayed still while provider catalog internals kept moving. That separation matters in agent stacks because the visible command path can look unchanged even when the routing substrate underneath is being prepared for broader model provider work.
The release matters because maintenance tags often reveal where future capability is being prepared. Bedrock routing, provider catalog shape, and disciplined release hygiene all affect how agent stacks resolve models under the hood. Codex .142.4 does not ask builders to redesign anything, but it does tell anyone wiring direct Bedrock routes that the catalog layer remains active.
OpenAI published Mapping Europe's AI Workforce Opportunity on June 29, extending its earlier United States labor market framework to the European Union. The report overlays ESCO occupations onto Eurostat employment data, so it is a taxonomy mapping rather than a survey, customer telemetry study, or partner deployment readout.
The headline numbers divide EU jobs into 4 transition archetypes. Roughly 12% sit in grow with AI, 14% have higher near-term automation potential, 27% are likely to reorganize, and 4-7% face less immediate change. That largest bucket matters, because it pushes against the simple narrative that every job category is on the same automation clock.
OpenAI calls out 6 countries. Luxembourg, Sweden, and the Netherlands lead in growth share occupations, while Germany, Greece, and Italy lead in automation potential occupations. The report also says the EU has a smaller share of higher automation occupations than the United States. The timeframe is near term, but OpenAI does not attach a fixed horizon, which leaves room for policy, adoption speed, and sector-specific workflows to change the realized impact.
The procurement teams at ministries and large buyers are reading reports like this one. If an AI integration augments analysts, support staff, engineers, or operations teams, the reorganize archetype may describe the deployment better than replace. A product narrative that maps to growth, automation, reorganization, or less immediate change lands more clearly than a generic productivity claim.
HP announced its Frontier strategic partnership with OpenAI on June 28, scaling pilots that began in February across customer-facing and partner-facing solutions, customer telemetry, employee productivity, software development, security, pricing, store support, and customer support. The announcement is global and enterprise-wide, with no seat count published.
HP is using OpenAI Frontier as the governance and context layer. ChatGPT and OpenAI models support security remediation and knowledge work, while Codex supports code modernization, planning, user interface scaffolding, and parallel delivery. HP is also wiring the stack into WXP, its device fleet platform, and into the HP Partner Portal, which serves more than 100,000 partners globally and channels more than 80% of HP business.
The pilot numbers are unusually specific. HP says one engineer shipped 122 pull requests across 43 projects in a matter of weeks. Multiple software bugs that previously took up to a month were remediated in a day. The security team regained about 82 hours per week of capacity. One engineer called it an amazing tool and said they use it daily.
Those numbers make Frontier more than another enterprise AI brand name. HP is describing a single governed stack where ChatGPT, Codex, partner operations, security work, and device fleet context sit behind one operating layer. The strongest signal is not only productivity, it is routing discipline. Security remediation, knowledge work, code modernization, pricing support, and partner support need different policies, context windows, approval paths, and telemetry loops even when they share the same model vendor.
TechCrunch profiled founder Connor Christou on June 27, describing how he used Claude after a cancer diagnosis to coordinate treatment research across blood panels, scan data, wearable output, and journal entries. He treated the model as a personal research coordinator rather than as a doctor or a narrow medical app.
The workflow works because Claude can reason across a long, messy timeline. Lab results, imaging summaries, wearable exports, and free-form notes can sit in one session, giving the model enough context to surface literature, compare protocols, track biomarker trends, and prepare questions for clinicians. The model is not making clinical determinations, it is helping one patient synthesize inputs no single appointment captures in full.
The mechanism is long context multimodal ingestion. Lab PDFs, wearable time series exports, scan summaries, and unstructured notes get pasted into a single model session where pattern matching runs across the full timeline. Claude surfaces literature hits, compares protocols, and flags anomalies against cohort baselines. The pipeline is manual data staging ahead of one prompt, no agent harness, no medical SDK, just a long context window and a motivated operator willing to curate the inputs.
The next unlock is direct health system connectivity. If electronic health platforms expose MCP servers or structured export endpoints, agents could pull labs, visit summaries, imaging metadata, medication timelines, and wearable signals into a controlled session without manual staging. That would move personal medical coordination from a founder-driven workflow into a repeatable agent surface, while still keeping clinicians in the decision loop.
OpenAI and Broadcom introduced Jalapeño on June 24, a custom AI chip built for large language model inference. OpenAI says the chip is designed to improve performance, efficiency, and scale across its systems, which places Broadcom directly inside OpenAI's hosted inference roadmap.
Jalapeño becomes the third disclosed acceleration path around OpenAI after the Cerebras partnership and the internal silicon program that has been discussed but not delivered. The vendor mix now includes Broadcom for custom inference silicon, Cerebras for fast inference, and an internal path that may target specialized serving patterns. Together, those paths reduce OpenAI's dependence on NVIDIA without requiring every workload to leave GPU-style infrastructure at once.
The chip brand itself is less important than what changes underneath. OpenAI could serve different model families on different backends, with Jalapeño handling efficient inference for some workloads, Cerebras handling latency-sensitive routes, and internal silicon taking on another class of serving. If that happens, latency, queue behavior, and throughput can shift behind the same endpoint, which makes observability more important than chasing a chip name.
Watch the model routing telemetry. When OpenAI publishes per-model routing telemetry or announces the first Jalapeño-served model, re-benchmark cost per token, time to first token, and batch throughput against your current baseline. The endpoint stays the same, but the substrate can change overnight.
Ford made one of the clearest fortune-scale AI admissions of the week. Leadership said the company mistakenly thought that just introducing artificial intelligence would produce a high-quality product, and now Ford is rehiring veteran engineers who had been let go.
The important part is that this was not framed as a model failure. It was a workflow failure. Ford put AI into a quality process without enough of the institutional knowledge, edge case awareness, and review discipline that senior engineers bring to production systems. The missing piece was the handoff model output flowing into a workflow where no one with deep domain knowledge was positioned to catch what the system missed.
That maps directly onto agent coding. If a team lets model output flow into production without validation hooks, senior review, and an escalation path for low-confidence changes, it is making the same bet Ford just walked back. Faster output can still mean worse outcomes if the harness around the model is thin. The public admission is rare because most enterprises wait until a quality incident surfaces before saying so.
AI works best as a productivity multiplier layered onto existing quality discipline, not as a replacement for the people who know where the edge cases live. Watch whether Ford's reversal shows up as a hiring pattern across other manufacturers and whether the lesson travels into enterprise software rollouts shipping AI features with the same thin review layers.
Micron is now being treated by Wall Street as a possible next NVIDIA-style AI infrastructure winner, because the constraint is shifting from raw compute to high-bandwidth memory. Sell-side desks started calling it on June 28.
Micron supplies HBM, the stacked DRAM that sits next to accelerator dies and feeds them data at terabytes per second rates. Current generation AI accelerators from NVIDIA and AMD depend on this memory class, and Micron is one of the 3 qualified leading suppliers alongside SK Hynix and Samsung. HBM3E ships in current hardware, and HBM4 is the next ramp to watch.
The technical point is that memory-rich accelerator configurations are not optional for large AI workloads. HBM sits on an interposer next to the GPU die, using a very wide interface to deliver the bandwidth needed for training and inference. If memory allocation is constrained, the accelerator roadmap is constrained too. Memory-rich SKUs have consistently been the first to slip on allocation through 2026.
Procurement plans for the rest of 2026 should treat memory allocation as a strategic input, not an afterthought. Even if base GPU supply loosens, the high memory configurations can stay backordered. For cluster planning, HBM availability is now on par with chip allocation, and whether export control regimes extend to advanced memory the way they did to leading-edge compute silicon is the next variable.
SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son publicly questioned the economics of putting AI data centers in orbit, and Sam Altman has also been skeptical. The concern is not sci-fi feasibility, it is the cost model.
The load-bearing problems are launch cost, replacement cadence, and power economics. Launch dollars per kilogram to low Earth orbit have fallen dramatically, but not enough to make orbital compute look like a near-term replacement for terrestrial data centers. Satellites in low and medium Earth orbit also need replacement after a handful of years, which turns the data center into a recurring launch and refresh cycle.
The solar argument is weaker than it sounds too. Solar irradiance above the atmosphere is only about 1.4 times terrestrial, which is not enough by itself to cancel the launch cost penalty for equivalent compute. And for training coherent workloads, terrestrial fiber links between data centers still offer a latency advantage that is hard to replicate from orbit.
Capacity planners should treat orbital compute as a tail risk input over the next 5 years, not a baseline procurement assumption. If it works, the first useful lane is more likely batch training with relaxed latency requirements, not real-time inference fleets serving user-facing products. The sub-second fiber latency between terrestrial sites is hard to beat from orbit.
Paul Mead, Apple's vice president in charge of the Vision Pro headset, is reportedly leaving Apple to join OpenAI's hardware team. He also led Apple's planned AI-powered smart glasses work, which makes the move especially relevant for anyone watching the next consumer AI device surface.
The broader signal is talent flow. OpenAI's hardware effort is drawing from Apple's VP bench, not just from search, mobile software, or Android hardware circles. That brings industrial design, optics, supply chain execution, and headset-adjacent product knowledge into the same room as frontier model product planning. Mead is the second Apple hardware VP to surface at OpenAI's hardware team this cycle.
OpenAI is already collaborating with Johnny Ive on a consumer AI device that Sam Altman has described as more peaceful and calm than an iPhone. That phrasing matters because it positions the product against phone-shaped attention capture rather than as another screen to stare at. The more peaceful and calm framing is itself a product positioning signal.
The likely target shape is voice plus vision, multimodal input, and constrained screen interaction. Tools designed for a future OpenAI device surface should assume the interface is ambient first and display light, not a laptop-style canvas shrunk onto the face. The Apple talent pipeline is one of the cleanest leading indicators of where the device surface is heading.
Multiple Asian AI labs have begun rolling out foundation models pitched as direct competitors to Anthropic's higher-end offerings, capitalizing on the prolonged U.S. export ban. The launches span several regional markets and target enterprise developers.
The capability parity story is no longer assumed to come only from U.S. labs. Regional providers are exposing familiar API patterns, building for enterprise buyers, and emphasizing data residency, local compliance, and sovereign cloud deployment as differentiators. Because the models are trained and served on infrastructure outside U.S. jurisdiction, they sidestep the export control regime that shaped model distribution for the past several quarters.
The procurement shift shows up on the buy side first. Regional teams facing data residency or compliance requirements can now adopt these models without the legal ambiguity that accompanied cross-border inference. API pricing is reportedly competitive against U.S. incumbents, and the providers are pitching Tier 1 inference through standard endpoints with multimodal support.
U.S. labs are watching years of market building potentially ceded to competitors who weren't slowed by the same regulatory friction. Watch whether API pricing stays aggressive as scale grows, whether providers ship stable enterprise SLAs, and how Anthropic responds if export controls ease. The gap could harden into a default preference for Asian buyers if no regional partnership or pricing response lands soon.
OpenAI acknowledged on June 26 that it narrowed the GPT 5.6 rollout at a government request and pushed back on the precedent. The company quote is that this kind of government access process should not become the long-term default, and that it keeps the best tools from users, developers, enterprises, cyber defenders, and global partners who need them.
The mechanism is a pre-publication access tier hold applied to the GPT 5.6 deployment. Capability scope was narrowed at the entitlement layer before general rollout. That is a different lever than a model-side capability cut. It is a rollout-side gating of which entitlements see the model first, and on what terms.
The OpenRouter public models feed showed no new GPT 5.6 family entries this cycle, which is consistent with a gated entitlement rollout rather than a wide release. Builders evaluating the GPT 5.6 family should treat entitlement gating as a first-class variable when planning provider diversification, not as a release date problem.
The watch items are whether the entitlement scope widens over time, whether a broader country-by-country launch pattern emerges, and whether the precedent sets a template for future pre-publication holds. The policy framing matters because OpenAI is publicly drawing a line about which access controls should and should not become routine.
OpenAI has hired Uber's India chief to run its India business, which is OpenAI's biggest market outside the United States. TechCrunch reported the move on June 26, framing it as the latest in a series of high-profile lateral moves into OpenAI's regional GM seats.
The broader signal is APAC go-to-market pacing decoupling from U.S. product release cycles. The hire brings operational experience from a mobility marketplace at scale, which is one of the few operating contexts that resembles the partner distribution complexity OpenAI is trying to build in India.
India's market has been a content, enterprise, and developer market priority for OpenAI for several quarters. Local partnerships, language coverage, hiring, and office build-outs are the operational levers that matter more than product release dates when the gating variable is regional distribution rather than model capability.
Watch for the first OpenAI India-specific partner program announcement and any pricing tier localization that ships after the new GM is in seat. The lateral move is a clean signal that the APAC lane is being staffed for sustained execution rather than ride along with US product cycles.
Quick local runtime note, Alma.3011 adds thinking capability detection for OpenCode sessions, auto-install paths for the terminal-based AI coding agent Claude Code and OpenCode when those binaries are missing, and a Windows Vulkan fix for inverted integrated versus discrete GPU classification.
The practical value is a cleaner handoff from a self-hosted Ollama setup into reasoning-aware coding sessions. If you are running open weights locally, pull a reasoning-capable model, launch OpenCode from the Ollama-triggered shell, and confirm the thinking trace is detected automatically instead of enabled by hand.
3 MCP projects are worth queuing. First, Prefect HQ/Fast is a Pythonic framework for building model context protocol servers and clients, with decorator-driven tool registration and built-in transports. Use it when you want your OpenClaw or Codex tool surface to stay as plain Python functions while transport, auth, and resources remain swappable.
Second, Deus Data/Codebase Memory MCP turns a repository into a persistent code knowledge graph served over MCP. The useful pattern is replacing file glob context dumps with scoped graph lookups, so a Claude code or Codex turn can resolve symbols across files without stuffing the prompt with the whole repo.
Third, Microsoft/MCP for Beginners is a multi-language curriculum for MCP fundamentals across .NET, Java, TypeScript, JavaScript, Rust, and Python. The practical exercise is to run a Python lab against a local model, then rebuild the same client in TypeScript and compare payload shape and round-trip latency.
Here is the practical cue. For Codex, no pin or update action is required from the chores-only Rust patch, but if you call Bedrock directly, verify your routing config still resolves through the catalog path you expect.
For EU deployments, map your customer narrative to OpenAI's 4 workforce archetypes: grow with AI, automation potential, likely to reorganize, or less immediate change. Procurement teams are reading these frameworks, and reorganize is often the more accurate framing when the work is augmented rather than replaced.
For enterprise OpenAI rollouts, use HP's numbers as benchmarks, not guarantees. Pull request volume, bug remediation time, and security capacity returned are now concrete metrics you can compare against your own dev and security surface.
For personal agents, long context multimodal ingestion is the cheap surface right now. Health, finance, legal, and other high-context personal domains can work before the polished app exists, because the bottleneck is data plumbing more than model quality.
For agent coding and enterprise AI quality, do not ship the model without the harness. Senior review, validation hooks, and escalation paths are not optional if you care about production outcomes.
For infrastructure, treat HBM allocation as a primary constraint in GPU planning. Memory-rich accelerator configurations may remain tight even when base GPU availability improves.
For model procurement in Asia, add regional providers to the evaluation matrix now. Capability parity, local data residency, sovereign deployment, and pricing pressure are all becoming live variables.
For entitlement-gated rollouts like GPT-5.6, treat entitlement scope as a planning variable and diversify providers rather than assume broad availability.
And for device surface planning, assume the next AI hardware wave is voice and vision first, screenlight, and designed around ambient interaction rather than phone-style engagement. That is the cue. For links and source notes, go to Toby on fitnesstech.com.
Thanks for listening to AgentStack Daily. We'll be back soon.